over the course of the next probably couple weeks, I'm going to talk about a lot of just general aspects about the magic within the verse of fairy tale. I'm going to talk as well about stuff like alchemy, spirit arts, curses. But with a lot of those, it's much more direct. In obviously with alchemy, there's only a handful of areas we really need to cover. Most of alchemy, a lot of the general basis for it seems to be more elemental, kind of like molding magic. Whereas only when you get to the more complicated levels that you get weird extra variants. And with curses are all much more kind of neat and tidy in a lot of what they do. We're getting expansion into a lot of areas with stuff like black magic, as well as, like I said, spirit arts are something. I'm hoping that by the time I get there, we just like one character just shows up and introduces like three more spirit arts, so I can say, okay, cool, we got at least a little bit more to talk about than just the Moonlight Divinities and what they're doing. But obviously, I'm going to start with the first like main magic that we got in the series. We did get Lucy relatively just showing off a little bit of celestial spirit magic once she was introduced. But the first one we really got to see in more so depth, I would say, at least from what I'm going more off of, is dragon slaying magic. Because though we did get explanation onto a bit of celestial spirit magic, we didn't start getting into the details until afterwards, where it's like dragon slaying magic. This is obviously a panel from 100 Years Quest, but it is a callback to the first time that Happy is bringing up dragon slaying magic to Lucy and explaining the basic fundamentals of it to the reader. And on top of that, I think it's important because aspects of dragon slaying magic are carried over into what's going on right now with the whole dragonization that's happening with the members of Fire and Flames. Because, oh yeah, my cat's chewing on something. I'm gonna have to get that. But as it were, it's not just applying directly to what magic you are gaining from from Slayer magic, but it also seems to benefit you in general if you have any other abilities predating your Dragon Slayer magic, or even ones that you obtain later that advance as your Dragon Slaying magic increases. So the reason that this is important too, as well as you gotta understand, and I will do a video on this as well, is talking about the difference between dragons in fairy tale versus a lot of dragons in other fictions. Just as a pretty fast version of what I'm gonna go into is a lot of other series. They, especially I'll use primarily mainstream shonen and stuff just because that's the easiest area to cover, is a lot of the time dragons end up being far more so what you would expect in, say, direct mythology. It's way more so like in Black Clover. Most of the dragons are, there's like a dragon that has to do with like a legend or a story that, though they are their own thing, they don't seem to be in an overall big structure of a species. And on top of that, they more so seem to be a lot more animalistic. Like with the Leviathan, like the water dragon god in Black Clover, for example, it talks a bit, but more so as, let's see if I can get, nope, chewing on a piece of plastic. It more so to where it can talk, but it doesn't seem to be very like an intelligent species in the same way that you would again with Fairy Tail. And we can compare it to Salamander and as well in Black Clover, even though it's a spirit. From this times that Tabata gives us little moments of it talking, I think it's mostly in like volume extras, but it seems to talk very similar to the Leviathan and how it just it's very short worded. It doesn't it's not having deep conversations, but it is capable of speech and understanding what you're saying. Whereas, say like in One Piece, you have like the artificial dragons with the ones on Punk Hazard, but that's more so seems to be just big reptilian creature that breathes fire but doesn't have seemingly intelligence outside of that of an animal. And you can't really count people like Kaido, Momonosuke or anything like that. Apparently Targo's stop. But if you kind of keep peering over, it's like stuff like Bleach, but like theirs is like a different take on like hollows in a different region. But again, you look at these and yes, you have dragons, but say like again in Black Clover and in One Piece, they tend to be way more so grounded than what you would expect, something like a dragon and how they're hyped through in a lot of fiction. And the reason that is because like in say like One Piece, dragons exist more so as like animals. and in Black Clover, they have more of a. There is one dragon specifically. My cat's gonna keep yelling. If he's too crazy, I'll pause it and move him, and then I'll come back to this. Um, they're more so, it's very singular and specific in what they do, whereas in Fairy Tail, dragons are way more akin to how they are in like Dungeons and Dragons, where they are this almost like hyper species tied to the natural world. They are in Fairy Tail that, before Acnologia and whatnot, they were the dominant species. And as we've been shown, one of the big factors that differs between dragons is they do have their own innate, just natural abilities as a dragon with their own elements and whatnot and racial powers. But as dragons progress, that you see the hierarchy, there are dragons that learn magic and things in addition to what they are given naturally, as well as like cases like Viernes, who learns alchemy. And when you think about just baseline how that's going to be, and again, I use Dungeons and Dragons as like the best example, because one of the things about it is dragons in that verse just get more powerful as they exist. So it's like on top of, similar to like how dragon slayers will slowly become a dragon no matter what, whether it's like through power level or through over usage of dragon slaying magic. But at the same time, because of that, every single time that there is an increase, and I'm gonna pause it, I'm gonna put him back. Okay, sorry. He recently found out where the dog food is, and he keeps trying to climb inside the bag. But with that, you look at, say, like whenever there's an increase. I wish we had like a very easy percentage of stages. Maybe we'll see a little bit more of that in the current arc. But every time there, a dragon slayer increases in the amount that their body has been altered to, match that of a dragon, it increases everything about them because of that. Because, like I said, dragons just their level of existence within natural power, as well as their affinity for these different power systems, and seemingly anything that they put effort into just increases on top of their general experience and growth. So when you compare that to what a dragon slayer is, they have in a lot of ways this built-in amp that will just apply across the board to whatever they have. And we've seen a bit of that with, say, like second generation dragon slayers, to where on top of their normal magics, their dragon slaying magic just seems to be a pretty much an upgrade in all aspects to that. But because they use it like a power up, it just boosts them in general. As well as, while we now have the dragonized versions of Fire and Flame, they aren't dragon slayers, but you can apply this same logic of the dragonization process to a dragon slayer, because while they are using more direct a type of magic that turns them into a dragon, the process that has turned these people now into dragons has made it so they are capable of getting that same increase and that same just amp that goes across all your abilities and all your stats and like physical capabilities. And because of that, that's one of the reasons that dragon slaying magic has really set in its own way, essentially, from other magics, because a understanding of how a lot of the wizards in Fairy Tail work, I feel like it's lost on the fact that we see a lot of direct combat, like melee combat, from the main cast. Most characters are not, like, they're not physically battle hardened. We know Natsu and Wendy, obviously, they're dragon slayers. Urza uses her magic to pretty much be a, sword fighter. She is using magic, but she doesn't fight like a caster. She's using magic to fight as a pretty much just a better version of a regular knight or swordswoman. And then with Lucy and Gray, we know that they are both oddities within their area, because molding mages generally aren't going to be getting hit and taking direct damage, especially for a celestial spirit wizard like Lucy. So when you really look at a lot of the general wizards in the verse, they are kind of, for the most part, not want to get in that zone of getting hit and taking damage and being able to physically handle the same level one for one of damage that they themselves are able to put out. And it's hard to really pinpoint a lot of them, because from what we've been shown consistently, it comes down to, yes, the level of and quantity of magic within the person and their ability to harness that, but also the type of magic that they use, because that is very key into how, once they utilize their magic, how is that going to disperse amongst their, their capabilities and their stats and their just general, their general like intake of damage. Because like I said, most people are going to be just general casters. They're not going to be in a scenario where they're used to getting hit, because most of them are going to avoid that. And obviously there are types of magic that are more so, like I said, made for where people are in a scenario where they're going to be fighting somebody more directly, but it's very rarely in a way that is like directly beneficial for them to fight like that, because dragon slayers don't fight even like other wizards, and then like in their own style. They are just generally buffing themselves with their attribute and just heading straight into combat. We see a lot of that really when you compare Dragon Slayer fights, like when two Dragon Slayers battle versus seeing a Dragon Slayer or any of the other wizards fight a character that isn't. You obviously have like Lucy and Kyria, for example. Lucy was in a rough spot because whereas Mimi was a direct fighter, she didn't have the personality of aggression and extreme hostility that Kyria had. So for someone like Lucy, whereas you're just, a Dragon Slayer is pretty much the worst possible scenario. The only thing Mimi really had on her is the fact that Mimi is hard to open distance with. So it's like once she just keeps getting closer, the difficulty of keeping that gap is only going to get harder and harder. And so like getting hits from her is only going to start to stack and become more of a problem. So for Dragon Slayers, they are both in benefit to being close up for their ability to attack the other person, but it also will make the other person more so on edge and more so in a spot of difficulty, because if they're more so used to fighting people at a distance, or even if it's just like a mid-range, like you're fighting a molding wizard. I keep wanting to say maker wizard. I like maker magic more than molding magic, but molding magic is the more common and official. But when you look at these, it tells you again, like with dragon slaying magic, it doesn't align with what you would normally get, even amongst a lot of other lost magic. And I know there's devil and god slaying magic, but as far as we know, dragon slaying magic came first, and so we're just gonna go with dragon slaying magic because that's the most widespread one. It's the easiest one to cover and the one we have the most examples of. So as we've gone through the verse and we've gone through all these general displays of Natsu and Wendy, Gaja, all these different people fighting, it really lays out as to why dragon slaying magic is so effective. If you're in a verse where most people are not going to just try and get directly up in your face, because when you look at a lot of other characters that are, they use magic and styles that are for direct combat, it's usually not, even then, not as like, as we've seen Natsu tons of times get right up like an inch forehead to forehead with someone. Because with Dragon Slayers, they're going to fight essentially like dragons. They want to just get in and use their physical, their physical advantage to just pummel the people that they're going up against. And most characters within the verse, like a lot of the general wizards, aren't going to be prepared for that, because on top of that, like they're not going to regularly run into this type of ancient lost magic that people probably for the most part are going to only hear about. So as it were, like when you compare it to the other stuff in the verse, it becomes much more clear when you look at it and say like, okay, well, most people, it's like you see a character using this element, you're just going to assume they have some strange type of way that they're going to, oh yeah, this guy, like, for instance, with fire, it's like you would probably assume more so something like fire maker magic, or something like maybe a takeover, or some form of ranged throw fireball spells. You're not going to assume this guy's going to cloak himself in fire and just come and pretty much just try and throw hands. So there's a lot to really gauge when it comes to assessing each of the direct kind of pros and cons of like usage of a magic. Not talking about the weaknesses like dragon slayers and motion sickness. It's more so of how you utilize, how you interact, and how the other people are going to respond to how a dragon slayer goes into a combat scenario. And because in the most part characters are not going to be used to that style of fighting in a lot of cases, but also they're not going to be used to just getting all these big direct hits on a character and then get back up. One thing too, I think is a really important comparison is when you look again when I was talking about the way that the Dragon Slayers fight. You look at like any of the Dragon Slayer versus Dragon Slayer, they're usually very brutal in comparison to the other fights. They're way more just direct, smashing into the other person. And when you say like look at like a Naruto fight, or say like I'm just trying to think of some like I was trying to think specifically Naruto, but it's like I guess you can use it for like Bleach, and it depends on like One Piece and whatnot. But usually when you have like fights, Naruto is the best example. Like I said, a lot of characters, they're doing martial arts, they're doing lots of very fast, quick, technique based martial arts combat. Characters don't get hit nearly as much. Like there's doing a lot more parrying, whereas like Dragon Slayers, like they do way more direct, heavy hits, but it's more so that that is the standard. There's not nearly as much of like the quick, small precision moves, like trying to do all these like smaller combo hits. Most of the time when Dragon Slayers are fighting, they every time they get a connect, they want that connect to potentially be the knockout. That is the style that they go about it, because again, they fight like ultimately these brutal animals that want to just physically shred and clash into whatever it is that they are seeking to pretty much annihilate in a lot of ways. But it's because of that that they stand out in most scenarios. Most people aren't going to expect that the person that you're going to fight is and say like again Natsu, is there's a lot of times where you look at like Aragorn at the very start, like swinging his scythe at Natsu, he just blocks it with his arm. You aren't going to get a lot of characters that run into that scenario where they're going to just be like, okay, like I'm going to body it and just, yeah, I'll take the damage, but because I'm physically strong enough, my body is physically durable enough, I have the fortitude as well as the readiness to just take the damage. It always ends up making it out that like with Dragon Slaying magic, the characters themselves are always going to be such a unless you go into it with knowledge that who you're fighting against, there's always going to be a real big surprise on that, because you also have stuff like each attribute has its own little perks. You aren't going to run into many Dragon Slayers that have the same attribute as well. So even if you're like, oh, this person is a Dragon Slayer, if you don't know their attribute, you're not going to fully understand what it is you're going to be getting into, because you can compare, say, just like Wendy and Gajeel. Like Gajeel's got his own, he's got the cool toughness of iron, and the fact that he can go into defensive points more so and then use the force from people's attacks to like kind of like flip into his own. Whereas like Wendy, with all her enchantments, is just able to do such a near infinite level of weird tricks, and she can just put magic in the ground or put it in people's clothes, put it into the weapons and whatnot. It just gives them a harder degree of really just figuring out what their opponent is going to have. Because like I'm going to do one on molding magic as well, but you look at like molding magic, for example, relatively you only need to know the attribute, because once you know the attribute, after the only other thing you really need to figure out is like, how does this character fight? Because we know maker or molding wizards all have their own style and their own way of going about making their creations, because at the end of the day, their magic has no limit as to what they can, like what it is they're making shape with, and it's all up to their creativity and their imagination. So even if you understand the character, you look at Greg, and for example, Greg can do, he can put on ice gauntlets, he can do long range attacks, he can do stuff directly to the ground, he can target the air. There's just nearly infinite possibilities and applications in a scenario like that, where it's like mostly with Dragon Slayers, you are going to be fighting them in a lot of the same way, but through different formats and different ways that they are going to be implementing it and harnessing it and bringing it at you. So I just wonder if this is going to be as much of like a nice little kind of just chit chat, go over it. I will do more of like a dive into more into like the mechanics and literally details. I'm gonna probably wait like another chapter or two. we are in a really good spot for this topic in general, because like I said, like the seeing right now, say like the Signario sisters, and seeing their alchemy, which should be advanced and enhanced through the dragon process, like the dragonization process, as well as, you know, Lekka and his fire make magic. It just is going to further build upon what we know of the, like, the again the foundation of what this magic does. It's not that, oh yeah, they're using dragon slaying magic, but they're also using their own magic and alchemy and stuff. It's more so the effect of what the dragon, you know, the it's dragonification for dragon slayers, dragonization for, you know, people artificially produced, but that just might be a different translation. But I'm pretty sure it isn't. I'm pretty sure they're actually slightly different, but it's just the different processes. But because of that, we can look at, say, like if Natsu was just like, you know what, I'm gonna take a summer and learn this other magic. Then if he became a dragon, you know, went further and further into his dragon form, and then became a full dragon, not only would his fire dragon abilities dramatically increase, but anything in addition, like if he's like, oh yeah, I learned this magic that it lets me turn trees into popcorn or something just kind of like nonsensical. And so it's like, yeah, as beforehand he could turn one tree, but after becoming a dragon he can turn entire forests just from like a hand wave. Anything like that where it's like, okay, you have a way of it. Once you get that buff, it just further pushes it. And we're gonna, like I said, we're right to where we're gonna get a further deeper explanation, and check again in a couple weeks for a good follow-up. A couple chapters will probably have a little bit more detail, because I know that the characters, as we get these next round of fights all divvied up and set, the characters that are now, you know, getting these dragon buffs, like we had the Signario sisters literally just being like, oh shit, but hey, this is pretty cool. It's gonna put them in a spot where we're gonna get explanation, and we're going to get, you know, like Lekka's gonna be like, oh, since I got the, you know, became a dragon, I can do X amount more, I can do this that I wasn't able to do before. And just finding out smaller stuff like that is going to give a lot of depth and detail to that we have, but not in full. And we're at a spot, like I said, that it's going to be able to finally uncover those last couple pieces, I think, that we need to have a full understanding of the dragons and the process at which that people go through to gain the full power. Because we've seen characters become dragons, but mostly start and then big jump and then end, whereas now we're in that middle point. And, you know, we have, like, this is one of the last things I'll go on. We have, say, like with Nibaru had his regular kind of set. He had that first level of dragon form that he had where he just got really buff. He had, you know, the longer teeth, you know, the ears and whatnot. He just essentially just gained a, I wish we had a percentage, probably like, I don't know, 25-30% in. Whereas once Irene started to step in, it was already like probably close to being full, because there was like that first bit where he was mostly just buff, and then he was at that like middle stage where he still was mostly humanoid, but he had those big horns coming out on both sides, and then he just kind of got to the spot where he was ripping his body all over and turning into a dragon more directly. And I'm hoping we start to see that in the next, like I said, the next couple chapters, in the next couple fights. Because once we get say like, okay, now we have a knowledge of where during the process we have a stage where it's like you are a partial dragon, then you're like a full hybrid where you're like right in the dead set middle, and then maybe there's one where it's clear that you are far more dragon than human, and then you become a dragon. And we see through each of these steps. That's one of the reasons also I think Brian, I'm hoping Brian comes back again and he's further dragon altered, because if he's like kind of like what we had with Kiria, but he is just showing each of these stages as he goes, and the increases as well as the advancements as his power goes, that'll be like a full dunk into, you know, into this whole topic. Because now right now I'm going off of pretty much mostly completed information, but we're still missing a couple pieces. But right now I mostly just wanted to talk about again the difference in how dragon slaying magic in a lot of ways is different than your average magic within the verse. And you know, the other lost magics, it's just fundamentally altering you and changing into something that is not not conventional for most wizards. And on top of that, like the fact that dragons have their own racial abilities and own powers that predate whenever they get magic. You're able to do stuff like with say the Dorna Anim, where it was immune to magic, but because dragon slaying magic, you while becoming a dragon, you are accessing these powers that are to the race, and because you are altering your body composition and DNA to where you are gaining these things that aren't magic, but through magic, you are able to lay effects and damage and do things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. Similar to Gajil being able to eat anti magic, but not because oh yeah, it's just his magic was more potent. It's because the dragon mechanics of dragon slaying magic they're magic in how you get to them. They themselves are not magic in how they operate mechanically, like I said. So once you get to the point where it's like, oh yeah, his dragon lungs and dragon stomach intake this anti-magic, this tiny microscopic bits of metal with anti-magic as well. Though they are harmful because they run into a process that is again fueled by magic, but in itself is not directly magic. It is able to mechanically overtake and something that is designed to corrode and cancel and destroy magic, and then convert it directly into stamina and magic for him. It just at the end of the day, the way that a dragon's physical body and physiology just works, it is able to overtake what you would otherwise run into in the verse. And it's similar to how with Devil Slaying, we know that Devil Slaying also has black magic and curse power involved in it, and it's not just magic. Because like black magic is still magic, but we don't know the details fully of like everything that makes it different, whereas curses are fully split off in its own thing. It's kind of like black magic is a way in between them, and similar to how like dragon slaying magic is in between what dragons naturally do and what wizards do and whatnot. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this. I mean, this is the prequel. Once I get to the next couple bits, as I'm gonna do one like I said, a molding magic. I don't really need anything I think left explained. We pretty much have everything we need for it, and everything that really kind of breaks it down into detail, as well as like how like the user gains like X, Y, and Z, as well as like how they advance. Grade. Just as long as you understand what you're applying to it, you are able to give it shape. Anyway, other than that, I'll talk to you guys in the next one.